What if all we understand about the pyramids turns out to be a falsehood? Not merely partial, not simply lacking elements, but essentially incorrect right from the start. Because the Giza pyramids, the Great Pyramid, the Sphinx, the old chambers hewn far into the bedrock, might have stood for millennia prior to the crowning of the initial pharaoh, before the existence of Egyptian script, before Egypt was even recalled as a concept. Examine the proof we've overlooked. The Sphinx displays marks from precipitation that hasn't graced this arid land in 9,000 years. The Great Pyramid incorporates mathematical principles. No priest from the 4th dynasty ought to have grasped pi, phi, or the precise Earth radius. Within its corridors, no hieroglyphics, no preserved bodies, no valuables, just quietude, exactness, and locked entrances to rooms we're forbidden to investigate. Texts from ancient Egypt confess that these structures were already old when their rulers encountered them. So, if Khufu didn't construct the Great Pyramid, who did it? And why has this idea been concealed as profoundly as the rooms under the dunes? Darkness descends upon the Giza plateau, and the age-old stones start to shimmer. The descending sun transforms the limestone into gold, casting extended shadows over the sands. The Sphinx hunkers at the brink of the escarpment, its stare locked on the eastern skyline, its form partially entombed, its visage marred by elements that shouldn't be present. Behind it, the trio of pyramids ascend in flawless arrangement, their edges crisp against the fading heavens, their scale so immense that space itself appears to shrink around them. The final tourist vehicles depart. Sounds dissipate into the desert breeze, and in the ensuing tranquility, a change occurs. The structures cease to be mere sights for visitors and revert to their eternal nature. Enigmas etched in rock, lingering in quietude. For eras, we've been instructed a straightforward tale. The pyramids arose from the 4th dynasty Egyptians. Around 2580 BCE, Pharaoh Khufu ordered the erection of the Great Pyramid, a sepulchre to ensure his journey to the beyond. Thousands upon thousands of laborers dragged 2.3 million limestone pieces up inclines, forming them with copper tools, piecing them together through sheer human determination and regal aspiration. His offspring Khafra erected the second pyramid and sculpted the Sphinx resembling himself. The third came under Menkaure. Collectively, they embody the zenith of Egyptian ingenuity, evidence of a consolidated realm's accomplishments. It is a narrative of victory, rock and toil, monarchs and perpetuity. Schoolbooks echo it, exhibits showcase it, and escorts narrate it each day to wanderers who gaze in astonishment below the soaring edifices. But the wasteland recalls otherwise as dusk arrives and the breeze glides gently amid the venerable rocks. Uncertainties emerge like silhouettes. What if this account isn't erroneous, but unfinished? What if the Egyptians didn't create these edifices, but received them, mending what was already venerable, asserting ownership over what had endured for millennia before their society even formed? This inquiry doesn't stem from imagination. It arises from irregularities that defy the standard account, from indications that murmur of a history much more antique, much more peculiar than anything we've been equipped for by chronicles. Ponder the Sphinx on its own. Step into the surrounding enclosure and you'll observe walls hewn deeply into the limestone foundation. The rock isn't even. It isn't scarred by wind. It carries profound, upright furrows, the clear imprint of aqueous degradation, intense, continuous downpours, the sort that demands ages to etch stone, the sort absent from this plateau for almost 9,000 years. Far prior to the inaugural Egyptian dynasty, far before script, far before the Nile established its present path, showers descended here, and the Sphinx was already present. Or ponder the Great Pyramid. Within, no hieroglyphs, no engravings, no mummified remains, no funerary items, no ceremonial depictions or invocations for the departed. merely granite rooms, passages resonant acoustically, and a huge granite container lacking a cover. The edifice embeds pi, phi, Earth's polar radius, and light's velocity in rock. Its corridors correspond with stars in manners demanding celestial accuracy exceeding anything linked to 4th Dynasty Egypt. It isn't a sepulchre. It is entirely something different. And then come the barred entrances. In 1993, a mechanical camera uncovered a limestone portal with copper fasteners far within a slender conduit. When technicians bored through it, they encountered another portal beyond. Sonar surveys disclosed cavities below the Sphinx and pyramid. Probes ceased. Entry was limited. The inquiries stay unresolved. Even the Egyptians provided hints. The inventory Stela portrays Khufu not as the pyramid's creator, but its repairer. The dream Stela depicts Thutmose IV unearthing the Sphinx from sands in bygone eras as if it had been interred and exhumed over epochs. These aren't markings of constructors. They are expressions of successors, of individuals who discovered monuments already old and sought to safeguard them. If this holds, if the pyramids and Sphinx precede dynastic Egypt by millennia, then all alters. Human chronicle isn't a linear progression from basic foragers to society. It is a loop. Societies ascend, attain excellence, and fade. Wisdom is inscribed, overlooked, and reclaimed. The pyramids wouldn't signify the dawn of grand design, but its enduring remnants from a vanished era, safeguarded through disaster, awaiting comprehension. The proof isn't confined to one spot. It is dispersed among fields that seldom converse, geology interpreting rain in rock, archaeology revealing irregularities too exact to justify, lore recalling periods before the deluge, genetics disclosing phantom groups wiped from annals, mathematics embedding Earth's measures in edifices allegedly made with copper implements. Fragment by fragment, these pieces form a silhouette tale, one that urges us to gaze beyond the handy account of rulers and graves and into a history much profounder than we've been instructed. This evening, we commence that voyage. We will traverse rock and ware, through venerable writings and barred rooms, through calculations and folklore. We will trace the proof from Giza to Göbekli Tepe, from the Nile to the constellations, from the plateau's exterior to the concealed gaps beneath. Every stride will return to the identical eerie inquiry. What if the Egyptians didn't construct the pyramids? The heavens grow dim. The final illumination vanishes from the limestone. In this interval between daylight and darkness, the edifices appear to inhale with time's burden not 4,500 years, but maybe 10,000, maybe greater. The pyramids persist, unconcerned with our tales, their rocks observing as realms flourish and crumble into powder. And if we heed attentively, we can perceive the quiet, not as void, but as existence, a summons, a query, a recollection held in form and rock. The Sphinx lingers, the pyramids tower. Our inquiry has merely started. If this probe into overlooked history strikes a chord with you, think about subscribing to the channel to accompany us on upcoming ventures into the enigmas that rest just past the boundaries of recognized wisdom. Adding a like to the video will assist others in finding these concealed narratives, and your ideas in the comments join the continuing quest for reality. Also, inform us where you are and what hour it is in your town at this moment. I'd enjoy hearing from you. Now, permit the proof to express itself. Forth lies the initial segment of evidence, the one that defies dismissal, the one inscribed in liquid and rock, the geological confirmation that the Sphinx was present millennia before Egypt as a nation. The dawn sun ascends over the plateau, and the Sphinx appears from gloom. From afar it seems ageless, perpetual, as if it has forever claimed this desert fringe. But remoteness hides verity. To grasp what the Sphinx discloses, you must lower into the enclosure that embraces it. the profound rectangular depression cut into the limestone base, the walls that encase the monument, resembling an antique mine's flanks, descend into that area, and the atmosphere cools. The walls ascend tall on both sides, obstructing the gusts surrounding you in rock. Glide your palm along the face, and you sense something unanticipated. Not the keen borders of chiseled stone, not the sleek sheen of fashioned brickwork, but profound, uneven channels, upright grooves, curved rims, waving exteriors that undulate like solidified swells. This isn't human implement's labor. This is water's mark. In 1990, Dr. Robert Schoch, a geologist from Boston University, positioned himself in this identical enclosure and observed what Egyptologists had missed for years. Educated to interpret rock as historians decipher parchments, Schoch identified the erosion forms instantly. The limestone barriers encircling the Sphinx displayed the distinct signs of extended water, weathering profound vertical cracks etched by ages of precipitation. The type of erosion that happens when liquid streams steadily over stone, slicing downward with steady, unyielding power. But there existed an issue, a deep, disconcerting issue. The Giza Plateau hasn't faced rainfall of that strength for nearly 9,000 years. The weather history is evident. Around 10,000 BCE, as the final ice age concluded, North Africa was verdant. Streams coursed where dunes now extend to the vista. Meadows blanketed the Sahara. Hippos navigated through bodies of water that exist no more. Rain descended routinely, intensely, molding the terrain over thousands of years. But around 7,000 to 5,000 BCE, the weather altered. The rains withdrew. The Sahara started its change into wasteland. By the era the Fourth Dynasty ascended in 2580 BCE, the Giza Plateau was already barren, already parched, already the desert we identify now. If the Sphinx enclosure exhibits signs of water erosion needing centuries of precipitation, then the monument must have been sculpted and subjected to the weather during that prior moist climate thousands of years before Khafra, thousands of years before Egypt formed as a united realm. Schoch's conclusions weren't rooted in conjecture. They were grounded in geological contrast, the identical approaches used to age erosion forms in gorges, streambeds, and bluffs worldwide. He inspected the weathering on the Sphinx body and enclosure barriers, and contrasted it to the weathering on adjacent structures whose building dates are solidly confirmed. The Old Kingdom temples constructed during the Fourth Dynasty edifices, definitively timed to the rule of Khafra and his heirs, display entirely distinct erosion forms. Their limestone faces are weathered laterally, smoothed by wind and grit. The outcome of 4,500 years of desert vulnerability. The borders are keen where shielded, worn where uncovered. This is wind erosion, the gradual abrasion of airborne fragments against rock, the anticipated deterioration form for monuments enduring in a dry climate. But the Sphinx enclosure differs. Its barriers display deep vertical channels, rounded grooves, and wave-like ripples, the evident result of water descending downward, accumulating, and etching the stone over prolonged spans. Wind doesn't etch vertically. Grit doesn't form curved cracks. Only water, enduring and intense, can generate this erosion type. The difference is irrefutable. Position yourself at the Sphinx's base and examine the enclosure barriers. Then stroll a few hundred meters to the Valley Temple with its accurately matched limestone covering. The temple exhibits 4,500 years of wind harm. The Sphinx enclosure exhibits something much more antique. Schoch's examination indicated that the Sphinx body and enclosure were sculpted sometime between 7,000 and 9,000 BCE, during the era when North Africa still got considerable rainfall. This would locate the monument's source in the pre-pottery Neolithic period, a time when human groups were just starting to test agriculture when script didn't exist, when Egypt as a society was still thousands of years from emerging. The ramifications are astonishing. If the Sphinx antedates dynastic Egypt by 5,000, 6,000, or even 7,000 years, then the monument isn't Khafra's or any pharaoh's work. It is a vestige from an overlooked age, a remnant from a weather and society wholly distinct from the one that subsequently asserted it. The Egyptians would have met the Sphinx already enduring, already venerable, already worn by downpours their own society never saw. This theory encountered prompt opposition. Egyptologists contended that no sophisticated culture able to sculpt such a monument was present in North Africa during the pre-pottery Neolithic. Conventional archaeology asserts that monumental stone art and large-scale building surfaced only with the emergence of intricate societies, hierarchies, and centralized governments, none of which, per the accepted chronology, existed before 4000 BCE. But geology ignores historical agreement. Stone logs time with impartial accuracy. The erosion forms persist whether they align with our tales or not. And there is another element that intensifies the enigma. The Sphinx itself is hewn from the active bedrock, its form molded by extracting limestone around it instead of gathering blocks. The identical bedrock shapes the enclosure barriers. When the monument was formed, those barriers would have been crisp, sharp, and freshly revealed. Over time, weathering would impact both the Sphinx body and the enclosure barriers similarly, since they are components of the same geological layer revealed at the same instant. What Schoch noted was uniform weathering across both the Sphinx and the enclosure barriers, proof that they weathered jointly under identical conditions for the same length. If the Sphinx had been sculpted in 2500 BCE, the enclosure barriers should exhibit 4,500 years of desert erosion, just like the adjacent temples. Instead, they exhibit much more extensive water weathering, signifying exposure during a far earlier, wetter weather. The sole way to account for this inconsistency is to acknowledge that the Sphinx is older, much older. Detractors highlighted later fixes and alterations made by Egyptian dynasties, claiming that repair work might muddle the weathering forms, but Schoch's examination considered this. The core limestone of the enclosure barriers beneath any subsequent additions displays the primary water erosion. The later Egyptian stonework, plainly distinguishable by its closer joints and different weathering, rests atop the older rain-marked bedrock like a mend on antique cloth. Envision what this signifies. Visualize the Sahara not as a wasteland, but as a grassland. Lush meadows extending beneath periodic rains, streams etching roots through the terrain. And somewhere on a limestone plateau overlooking a bountiful valley, someone sculpted a colossal shape from the bedrock, a lion maybe, or a being we no longer recall its countenance oriented toward the ascending sun. Ages elapse, the showers descend, the monument deteriorates, societies ascend and descend in cycles we cannot follow. The weather changes, the Sahara parches, the monument is entombed, overlooked, reclaimed, entombed anew. By the era the Egyptians arrive, it is already venerable, its sources lost to time. They view it as a holy remnant, dig it out, mend it, perhaps reshape the head into a pharaoh's resemblance, and integrate it into their own lore. They didn't create it, they inherited it. This is what the rock discloses, not through hieroglyphs or engravings, but through geology's tongue, a tongue that communicates in erosion forms, weather records, and weathering marks. The proof is tangible, quantifiable, and replicable. The rain etched its account into the limestone long before any writer mastered script. And if the Sphinx is truly a survivor from a verdant Sahara society, then it endures as confirmation of something disturbing. Advanced human cultures may have been present far earlier than we've been instructed, not merely hamlets or camps, but groups able to plan, etch, and form monuments intended to persist. The wasteland guards its mysteries, but stone doesn't deceive. the upright channels in the enclosure barriers persist. Mute observers to showers that fell when the Sahara was youthful, when the world differed, when someone positioned on this plateau and sculpted a monument that would outlive their whole society. The Sphinx recalls what history overlooked, and the reign impossible, venerable, irrefutable, remains inscribed in the barriers. Rock communicates in erosion forms and weathering marks. But the Egyptians provided another sort of account, one deliberately etched into monuments, engraved on stelae, safeguarded in texts intended to declare the actions of rulers. And when you examine those engravings meticulously, something unanticipated surfaces. The Egyptians themselves never asserted to have constructed the Sphinx. In truth, their own documents imply they thought these structures were already venerable when they discovered them. This isn't a contemporary notion. It isn't conjecture forced onto mute rocks. It originates straight from the engravings left by the pharaohs themselves, statements etched in hieroglyphs, meant to endure forever, safeguarded on limestone slabs, positioned in the shade of the very structures they portray. The most disclosing of these writings is the inventory Stela, uncovered in the 19th century near the Great Pyramid, etched during the 26th dynasty around 670 BCE. The Stela narrates occurrences linked to Khufu's rule, the pharaoh conventionally credited with constructing the Great Pyramid around 2580 BCE. But the engraving doesn't portray Khufu as a constructor. It portrays him as a repairer. The text is clear. It declares that Khufu found the Sphinx already enduring, already venerable, interred to its shoulders in sand. Per the Stela, Khufu removed the sand, mended the monument, and erected a temple adjacent to honor the deities. The engraving also references the pyramids as present edifices during Khufu's rule, not as endeavors ordered by him. Read that once more. Per this ancient Egyptian document, Khufu didn't construct the Great Pyramid. He discovered it. Egyptologists have long rejected the inventory Stela as a subsequent invention, a segment of propagandistic alteration produced over 2,000 years after Khufu's passing. They contend that the 26th dynasty, an era characterized by efforts to restore Egypt's past splendor, generated many texts that idealize the history, ascribing false chronicles to venerable rulers to validate current monarchs. But rejection isn't clarification. If the Stela is an invention, why would later Egyptians opt to lessen Khufu's heritage? Why depict him as a repairer rather than the designer of the planet's grandest monument? Propaganda usually magnifies feats, not diminishes them. If the aim was to exalt the Fourth Dynasty, why not declare Khufu as the ultimate constructor, the seer who directed the Great Pyramid's erection? The Stela does the reverse. It frames Khufu as someone who met structures already present, already requiring mend. It implies that even during his era, these edifices were aged enough to be interred, overlooked, and needing unearthing. And the inventory Stela isn't solitary. Another engraving much more renowned and equally disclosing stands between the Sphinx's paws. Known as the Dream Stela, it was raised by Pharaoh Thutmose IV around 1400 BCE, over a millennium after Khufu's rule. The Stela recounts a tale. As a youthful prince, Thutmose dozed in the Sphinx's shade during a hunt. In his vision, the Sphinx addressed him, vowing kingship if he would remove the sand that had once more interred the monument up to its neck. Thutmose complied. He unearthed the Sphinx, mended it, and later ascended as pharaoh. The Dream Stela honors this mend act, and the engraving specifically portrays the Sphinx as being in decay and abandonment, interred by the desert sands over which it had endured since time immemorial. Note the phrasing, since time immemorial, not since my forebear Khafra's rule, not constructed by the Fourth Dynasty. The text frames the Sphinx as something already venerable beyond recall, something that had endured so long it had been engulfed by the wasteland and overlooked. Why would Thutmose IV, a pharaoh governing over 900 years after the presumed sculpting of the Sphinx, portray the monument as vanished to time? If Khafra had sculpted it in 2500 BCE, then by 1400 BCE, it would have been approximately 1,100 years old, notable but not venerable enough to be overlooked. The Fourth Dynasty pyramids were still recalled. The rulers' names were still uttered. Temples were still utilized. So why was the Sphinx already interred, already forsaken, already handled as something older than the remembered history? The response clarifies when you retreat and inspect the wider form. Across various dynasties, across engravings divided by centuries, Egyptian texts steadily portray the Sphinx and pyramids not as Egypt's creations, but as legacies from a prior age. They discuss mend, unearthing, and reclamation, not original erection. This form is meaningful. The Egyptians were precise chroniclers. They recorded everything: conflicts, commerce, temple building, royal orders, sacred celebrations. Pharaohs announced their construction endeavors with pride, cataloging every stone positioned, every deity venerated, every foe vanquished. Temple walls are blanketed with engravings celebrating rulers' feats, often inflating their actions to divine levels. And yet, regarding Giza's greatest structures, this boastful chronicling becomes mute. There are no contemporary Fourth Dynasty engravings inside the Great Pyramid describing its erection, no detailed narratives of how the rocks were mined, conveyed, or assembled, no hieroglyphs announcing Khufu's foresight or engineering brilliance, just quietude and later texts that discuss mend rather than creation. Contrast this to other Egyptian structures. The Karnak Temple has engravings detailing its growth over centuries, listing rulers who added pillars, entrances, and holy places. The mortuary temple of Ramesses II at Abu Simbel is covered with etchings announcing his triumphs and divine position. Even smaller graves in the Valley of the Kings are filled with texts directing the deceased through the afterlife, invocations etched into every face. But the Great Pyramid, void of engravings, the Sphinx, no origin myth, no constructor's mark, only later texts portraying reclamation. This void isn't coincidental. It is an emptiness where we anticipate assurance. And into that emptiness, the later engravings whisper a troubling option. The Egyptians didn't construct these structures because they were already present when Egypt ascended to might. Ponder the ramifications. If the Sphinx was already interred and overlooked by Thutmose IV's era, then it must have endured far longer than the standard chronology permits. Monuments don't become venerable beyond recall in merely a millennium, not in a culture that sustained continuous written documents, not in a society that honored its forebears and safeguarded their names. But if the Sphinx had endured for 5,000 years, for 7,000 years, for 10,000 years, then the phrase time immemorial starts to resonate. Then the interment in sand, the absence of recall about its sources, the repeated requirement for unearthing and mend. All of it aligns with a different tale, a tale in which the Sphinx antedates Egypt itself. The Egyptians met these structures the way archaeologists meet ruins today, as vestiges of something older, something constructed by people whose names had vanished, whose aims had dimmed into legend. They mended them, they revered them, they erected temples around them, but they didn't construct them. This is what their own engravings disclose if we are willing to examine them without the prejudice of the contemporary tale. The inventory Stela and the dream Stela are not lone irregularities. They are proof of a steady tradition, one in which the pyramids and Sphinx were comprehended as inheritances from a disappeared age, not creations of the Fourth Dynasty. Why then does mainstream Egyptology maintain that Khufu constructed the Great Pyramid and Khafra sculpted the Sphinx? The response lies partly in the lack of alternative proof. Without contemporary engravings, Egyptologists depend on indirect links. The closeness of the pyramids to 4th Dynasty burial locations, the stylistic resemblances between certain figures and the Sphinx's head, and the logistical viability of the construction chronology. But indirect proof isn't identical to confirmation. And when the Egyptians' own texts contradict the accepted chronology, we must inquire, whose tale are we trusting, and why? The sun descends again over Giza, and the Sphinx reverts to gloom. The dream Stela stands mute between its paws, its hieroglyphs still decipherable after 3,400 years. The words persist, time immemorial, not recent, not recalled, not asserted. Even the Egyptians, experts of rock and document, gazed upon these structures with reverence and doubt. They viewed themselves not as eternity's designers, but as its guardians, not the Sphinx's creators, but the ones who discovered it, interred and overlooked, waiting beneath the sand. The structures were already venerable when Egypt was youthful. The engravings state it, the geology affirms it, and the quiet inside the pyramids, untouched by any pharaoh's boastful touch, resonates with the same verity. These are not rulers' graves. They are vestiges of something older, and the Egyptians recognized it. If the Egyptians inherited the structures rather than constructed them, then the subsequent inquiry becomes inevitable. What were these edifices originally meant to accomplish? To respond, we must abandon the desert sun and lower into the Great Pyramid's interior itself, into corridors hewn with unattainable accuracy, into rooms that challenge burial's reasoning, into a quiet that feels less like a grave and more like a device awaiting comprehension. The entry is tight, steep, and oppressive. You lower through the original corridor, bent and cautious, the limestone barriers pressing near on both sides. The air becomes cooler, the outer world's noises diminish. And then the corridor widens, and you discover yourself positioned in the grand gallery, a hallway so expansive, so architecturally advanced, that it halts you abruptly. The grand gallery ascends nearly 30 feet high, its barriers corbelled in overlapping limestone slabs that taper toward the roof, forming a structure both practical and inexplicable. Each rock is cut with tolerances gauged in millimeter fractions. The angles are flawless. The alignment is exact, and at the distant end, the corridor leads upward into the king's chamber, a space constructed wholly of red granite blocks, each weighing dozens of tons, joined so closely that a knife cannot slide between them. Position yourself in that chamber. Allow the quiet to settle around you and inquire, does this seem like a grave? There are no hieroglyphs on the barriers, no invocations for the departed, no painted frescoes showing the passage through the underworld, no engravings naming a pharaoh or calling upon deity's safeguard. Every other royal grave in Egypt is saturated with ritual writings, images, incantations etched into rock to direct the deceased through the afterlife's perils. The barriers of graves in the Valley of the Kings are covered from floor to roof with scenes from the Book of the Dead, protective gods, and statements of divine rulership. But here in the grandest monument ever erected, there is nothing, just even granite barriers, a level roof, and in the room's center, a massive rectangular container hewn from a single red granite block. This container, often termed a sarcophagus, has become the tomb theory's focal point. Egyptologists argue that it was intended to contain Khufu's body, that tomb thieves emptied it in antiquity, and that the pyramid's aim is obvious. But the container itself opposes this view. It has no cover. It never possessed one. The inner surfaces are coarse, unfinished, inappropriate for containing a body swathed in holy cloths. There are no engravings, no cartouches, no sign that it was ever employed for interment. And here is the crucial element. The container is broader than the corridors leading into the king's chamber. It couldn't have been introduced after the chamber was barred. It must have been positioned during erection, hewn on site, or incorporated into the structure from the outset. This isn't how graves are planned. Sarcophagi are introduced during interment, not embedded as architectural elements. The granite container in the king's chamber operates more like a part of the pyramid's plan than a funerary item. And then there is the sound. In recent years, investigators examining the king's chamber's acoustic qualities uncovered something remarkable. The room resonates at a particular frequency, 110 Hz. When sound is presented, a voice, a drum, a note, the granite barriers enhance it, generating a harmonic resonance that pulsates through the rock and into the body of anyone positioned inside. This frequency isn't arbitrary. Neuroscience studies have demonstrated that 110 Hz can modify brainwave activity, prompting states linked to meditation, trance, and elevated awareness. Was the chamber planned for this? Was it erected to resonate, to enhance sound, to generate an experience past the physical? If so, it wasn't a grave. It was a tool. The Grand Gallery, too, defies interment reasoning. Its corbelled barriers form a space that enhances sound, directing acoustic waves upward and concentrating them toward the king's chamber. Some investigators have suggested that the gallery once contained wooden or metal resonators, mechanisms that could oscillate at specific frequencies, transforming the whole corridor into a tuned acoustic room. The recesses etched into the gallery's barriers, long presumed symbolic, may have been practical slots intended to contain parts of a now disappeared system, venture deeper into the pyramid, and the irregularities increase. Below the king's chamber rests the queen's chamber, another granite space with narrow conduits extending from its barriers. These conduits don't lead exterior. They were barred from within, their aim unknown. But when technicians gauged their angles, they uncovered something astounding. The conduits align with particular stars as they would have shown in the night sky thousands of years past. The southern conduit from the Queen's chamber directs toward Sirius. The northern conduit aligns with the star Thuban, which functioned as the North Star during the period when the Sahara was still verdant. These aren't arbitrary directions. They are astronomically exact calculated alignments that demanded knowledge of celestial mechanics, star locations, and Earth's axis's slow wobble known as precession. Why would a grave include star conduits? Why orient rooms toward constellations? The Egyptians linked certain stars with deities and the beyond. But this accuracy level exceeds symbolism. These alignments imply the pyramid was erected by people who grasped the heavens with scientific precision, who monitored the sky not for ritual solely, but for reasons we have yet to completely grasp. And then there is the granite itself. The king's chamber is built from red Aswan granite, a rock abundant in quartz crystal. Quartz is piezoelectric. It produces an electrical charge when exposed to pressure. The pyramid's immense mass pressing down on the granite blocks would generate ongoing pressure, potentially creating weak electrical fields within the chamber. Combined with the acoustic resonance and star alignments, this poses a question. Archaeologists are hesitant to pose, was the Great Pyramid planned to harness energy? Not in the contemporary sense of power creation, perhaps, but in manners we don't yet comprehend. As a mechanism for concentrating sound, light, or electromagnetic fields, as an edifice constructed per physics principles that align with natural forces, as a machine built for aims that surpass interment. The mathematical proof supports this view. The Great Pyramid's dimensions embed information far past what a grave needs. The ratio of its height to its base perimeter is precisely 2 pi, meaning the pyramid's proportions embed pi. The mathematical constant that defines circles and spheres. The pyramid's height multiplied by 43,200 equals Earth's polar radius. The perimeter multiplied by the identical number equals Earth's equatorial circumference. This isn't happenstance. The number 43,200 is meaningful in ancient celestial systems, representing a fraction of the precession cycle, the 25,920-year wobble of Earth's axis. The constructors encoded geodetic data, Earth's dimensions, into a structure allegedly built as a grave for one king. Why? The pyramid is also oriented to true north with an accuracy of 3/60 of a degree, more exact than most contemporary buildings. Achieving this demands advanced surveying, celestial observation, and a grasp of Earth's rotation. The cardinal orientation isn't symbolic. It is practical, as if the pyramid was planned to interact with the planet's geometry. Phi, the golden ratio, appears in the pyramid's slope angle. The king's chamber's dimensions reflect harmonic mathematical relations. The structure is saturated with encoded information, constants, ratios, and measurements that suggest the constructors possessed knowledge of mathematics, astronomy, and Earth's physical properties. If this was a grave, why embed such information? Why erect with such accuracy? Why align with stars and cardinal points? Why build acoustic rooms and quartz-filled granite spaces? The proof points in one direction. The Great Pyramid wasn't constructed as a grave. It was constructed as something else, a scientific tool, a resonant edifice, a geodetic indicator, a storehouse of knowledge preserved in rock. Graves are places of ritual and recollection. They are adorned, engraved, filled with items meant to aid the dead in the beyond. The Great Pyramid holds none of this. It is mute, mathematical, exact. It communicates not in words but in proportions, frequencies, and alignments. It feels less like an interment room and more like a design, a structure planned to convey information to whoever holds the knowledge to interpret it. Exit the pyramid and into the desert sun, and the inquiry pursues you. If it wasn't a grave, then what was it? What were the constructors attempting to accomplish? What wisdom were they safeguarding? And why, after all this time, do we still decline to perceive the pyramid for what it clearly is? Not a grave, a machine, a monument to a science we have overlooked, a message embedded in rock, waiting for someone to comprehend. The quiet inside the pyramid isn't the quiet of death. It is the quiet of something awaiting, something incomplete, something still resonating with aim. Even now, after millennia of abandonment, and we have only started to heed. If the Great Pyramid isn't a grave, and its rooms were planned for aims we don't yet grasp, then the next inquiry becomes vital. What else rests concealed inside? For over a century, explorers presumed the pyramid's interior had been completely charted: 3 primary rooms, a few corridors, and nothing further. But in 1993, a German technician named Rudolf Gantenbrink dispatched a small robot into a conduit where no human could proceed. And what it uncovered altered everything. The conduit in question stretches from the Queen's Chamber, one of the pyramid's central spaces. It is scarcely 8 inches square, far too tight for any individual to enter, too diminutive even for a youth. For years, Egyptologists dismissed these conduits as symbolic, labeling them air shafts or soul shafts planned to permit the pharaoh's spirit to rise to the stars. But if that were accurate, why were they barred from within? Why erect passages that direct nowhere? Gantenbrink crafted a small robotic crawler fitted with a camera and lights. He named it Upuaut, after the Egyptian deity who opens the path. On March 22, 1993, the robot entered the Queen's Chamber's southern conduit and began its gradual ascent. The camera sent grainy footage back to exterior monitors. Even limestone barriers, tight corners, the conduit climbing steadily upward into obscurity. And then, 65 meters into the passage, the robot halted. Obstructing the path was a limestone door, not a fallen segment, not rubble, a door intentionally positioned, carefully installed with 2 copper pins or handles extending from its face. The door was polished even, set level into the conduit barriers, plainly deliberate. It wasn't planned to keep individuals out. No individual could fit in the conduit initially. It was planned to seal something in. The uncovering was promptly contentious. If the pyramid was merely a grave, Why would its constructors build narrow conduits leading to barred doors deep inside the edifice? What aim could they fulfill? And more crucially, what rested beyond them? For almost a decade, the doors stayed untouched. Appeals to probe further were postponed, deferred, entangled in administrative limits. Finally, in 2002, a group led by Dr. Zahi Hawass, then Egypt's primary archaeologist, obtained permission to bore a small opening through the door using a fiber optic camera. The occurrence was broadcast live, transmitted to millions, as if the pyramid's greatest mystery was about to be disclosed. The camera advanced through the opening, the lens adjusted. And on the door's other side, barely inches distant, was a second door. Another limestone block, another obstacle, sealing the conduit even deeper into the pyramid. The transmission ended suddenly. The probe was terminated. No additional exploration was approved. The second door persists untouched. The conduit stays barred, and the inquiries remain unresolved. Why construct a door inside a passage no human can enter? Why position a second door right behind the first? If these conduits were symbolic, why bar them so intentionally? And why, when contemporary technology finally permitted exploration, did entry suddenly become limited? The form repeats across the pyramid. In the Queen's Chamber's northern conduit, explorers discovered a similar setup, a tight passage leading upward, a metal item embedded in the rock, and once more limited entry, preventing additional probe. Radar scans performed in the 1980s and again in the 2000s disclosed irregularities throughout the pyramid, voids, rooms, cavities that don't appear on any architectural blueprint. Some scans indicated hollow areas beneath the king's chamber. Others detected large voids within the pyramid's core stonework, spaces that shouldn't exist if the edifice is simply a solid pile of limestone blocks. But each time these irregularities are detected, exploration stops, entry is refused. The data is categorized or rejected, and the official tale persists unchanged. The pyramid is a grave fully probed containing no further mysteries. Descend below the Giza plateau itself, and the enigma deepens. In 1999, Hawass himself declared the uncovering of an underground complex, now termed the Osiris Shaft. Situated near the causeway linking the pyramids to the Sphinx, the shaft lowers over 90 feet through solid bedrock, traversing 3 chamber levels before arriving at a final space submerged in groundwater. At the lowest level, explorers discovered a massive granite sarcophagus encircled by smaller rooms, all hewn from the bedrock, with accuracy that matches the pyramid itself. The official clarification frames the Osiris Shaft as a symbolic grave, a cenotaph representing the mythical interment place of Osiris, deity of the underworld. But the edifice defies this view. The shaft demanded advanced engineering to excavate, cutting through limestone and granite, handling groundwater, building rooms at depths that test even contemporary drilling methods. The lowest room persists partially submerged, its full measures unknown, its aim unexplained. And here is the troubling element. Radiocarbon dating of organic matter found in the shaft implies it may be older than the 4th dynasty, much older. If accurate, this would mean the Osiris Shaft, like the Sphinx, antedates dynastic Egypt's rise. It would mean there are edifices below Giza that were constructed by the same unidentified culture that left the rain-scarred Sphinx and the mathematically embedded pyramid. Radar and seismic surveys around the Sphinx have disclosed similar irregularities. Subsurface scans indicate voids, tunnels, and rooms below the monument spaces that don't match any known excavation. In the early 1990s, researchers employing ground-penetrating radar detected what seemed to be a large rectangular room directly below the Sphinx's paws. The uncovering produced international notice and demands for excavation. Permission was refused. The zone was proclaimed restricted, and once more exploration ceased exactly when it appeared most promising. Why? If these rooms are merely natural voids or empty tunnels, why not unlock them and verify? If they hold nothing meaningful, why limit entry? The form implies not absence of proof, but its suppression, a deliberate attempt to manage what is uncovered, and more crucially, what is disclosed to the public. Ponder the reasoning. The Great Pyramid is human history's most examined monument. It has been gauged, scanned, probed, and analyzed for centuries. And yet, every time contemporary technology reveals something unanticipated, a barred door, a concealed void, an underground room, entry is limited, and further probe is stopped. This isn't the conduct of archaeologists assured in their comprehension. It is the conduct of institutions safeguarding a tale from proof that contradicts it. The conduits inside the pyramid weren't constructed for ventilation. They weren't symbolic soul passages. They were built with aim, barred intentionally, and concealed for reasons the constructors didn't clarify. The doors don't keep people out. They were never planned for people initially. They keep something in, or they safeguard something behind them. Wisdom, perhaps. Items. Proof of the pyramid's true function. What rests beyond the second door? What exists in the radar-detected voids? What rooms remain barred below the Sphinx, below the plateau, below the centuries of sand and quiet? We don't know. And increasingly it appears we are not intended to know. The pyramid was constructed with tolerances gauged in millimeters. Its passages align with stars. Its dimensions embed the earth. Every element implies intentionality, planning, and aim. So why would the constructors create conduits leading to barred doors? Why build underground rooms at depths needing advanced engineering? Why conceal rooms below the Sphinx, bar them, and leave no record of their contents? The only response that aligns with the proof is the one mainstream archaeology declines to ponder. These edifices were planned to safeguard something. Not bodies, not valuables, something more precious. Information perhaps, technology, proof of a culture that knew it faced disaster and opted to embed its wisdom in rock, in mathematics, in concealed rooms that would endure the ages. The doors were intended to be discovered, but only by those able to comprehend what rests beyond them. The barriers weren't planned to repel grave thieves. They were planned to protect what was inside from time itself. And we, positioned on the brink, equipped with robots and fiber optic cameras, are finally able to open them. But every time we approach that brink, entry is refused. The door persists closed, the room stays barred, and the inquiries multiply in the quiet. What is behind the second door? What rests below the Sphinx? What wisdom did the constructors conceal in rooms we are forbidden to probe? The pyramid doesn't guard the dead, it guards secrets. And someone somewhere has resolved those secrets must stay interred. The robot remains inactive, its camera obscured, the conduits stay barred. The voids below Giza persist unprobed. And the greatest enigma is no longer what the pyramid holds, but why we are being blocked from discovering it. Barred doors below rock are one type of quiet, but there is another type, perhaps more unsettling. The quiet of documents that once existed and then disappeared, erased by flame, flood, or intentional ruin. If the pyramid's constructors left written account explaining their origins, where is it? And if such documents once existed, what occurred to them? The response may rest in fragments, echoes of vanished texts, references to writings that no longer endure, tales safeguarded in history's edges before they too vanished. One such tale concerns a Coptic manuscript supposedly uncovered in the 19th century, a text that, if authentic, would overturn all we believe about the pyramid's age. But the manuscript is absent now, ruined under circumstances that stay unclear, leaving only descriptions, partial renditions, and the eerie possibility that we once possessed confirmation of the pyramid's prehistoric origins and lost it. The tale starts in Old Cairo's libraries, where European gatherers and scholars in the 1800s hunted for ancient texts concealed in Coptic monasteries, private assemblages, and overlooked archives. During this era, Egypt was a bounty for antiquarians. Napoleon's venture had ignited European intrigue with Egyptian history, and manuscripts, papyri, and artifacts streamed out of the nation into museums and private possession. Among these gains were Coptic Christian texts, writings safeguarded by monks who had inherited libraries from prior Egyptian traditions, some extending back to the Ptolemaic and Roman periods, and in uncommon instances, even further. One such manuscript reportedly uncovered in a monastery outside Cairo held a passage that astonished the gatherer who first examined it. The text, penned in Coptic script, but evidently translated from an older origin, described the pyramids in terms that opposed all known history. Per those who viewed it, the manuscript stated that the pyramids were constructed before words, meaning before written language was present and before the river knew its place, suggesting a time when the Nile had not yet established its current course. If precise, this would position the pyramid's erection in a period antedating not only dynastic Egypt, but the Nile River system's formation as we know it. Geological studies imply the Nile experienced major shifts around 10,000 to 12,000 years ago as the African climate transitioned from the African humid period's wet conditions to today's arid desert setting. A text asserting the pyramids existed before the river knew its place would be portraying an edifice built during or before this climatic shift, thousands of years before the Fourth Dynasty. Before script, before recorded chronicles, the gatherer who uncovered the manuscript supposedly made notes and tried a rendition. He displayed the text to associates, igniting discussion about its genuineness and significance. Some rejected it as a medieval creation, a mystical or metaphorical text not intended to be taken literally. Others were captivated, perceiving in the manuscript echoes of older Egyptian traditions that discussed primordial ages before the gods themselves. But before the manuscript could be adequately examined, photographed, or safeguarded, it was ruined. The narratives differ. Some sources assert it was lost in a blaze that devoured the gatherer's property. Others imply it was intentionally incinerated by unidentified parties. A few hints suggest the manuscript was sold to a private purchaser and then vanished. Its present location unknown. What persists are indirect descriptions, fragments of renditions noted in letters and diaries, and the accounts of monks who asserted their monastery had once contained the text. Why would anyone ruin such a document? If the manuscript was a forgery, a segment of historical invention crafted to perplex or mislead, why not reveal it as such and safeguard it as an oddity? Forgeries hold value in their own way. They disclose the convictions and motives of their makers, the historical settings in which they were produced. Scholars examine forgeries exactly because they inform us what people desired to believe, what tales they aimed to build. But this manuscript, if it was a forgery, acted oddly. It didn't exalt Egypt. It didn't elevate the pharaohs or broaden their feats. Instead, it reduced them, implying that the pyramids, Egypt's grandest structures, were not Egyptian whatsoever, but vestiges from an earlier unnamed culture. This is the opposite of what forgers usually do. When someone fabricates an ancient text, they generally seek to boost a civilization's prestige, to create legendary rulers, to assert ancient wisdom or divine grace. They don't erase credit from their own culture and ascribe it to an unknown forerunner. The manuscript's content, as portrayed by those who claim to have viewed it, aligns alarmingly well with proof that has only lately surfaced. The phrase "before the river knew its place" matches geological research, indicating that the Nile's course altered dramatically during the shift from the African humid period to the current arid climate. The concept of erection before words aligns with the total absence of engravings inside the Great Pyramid and the lack of any contemporary Fourth Dynasty texts portraying its erection. and the manuscript's ruin fits a broader form of lost documents surrounding the pyramids. Ponder what has vanished over the millennia. The Alexandria Library's contents, which contained texts from the ancient world, including Egyptian documents antedating the Ptolemaic period. The Heliopolis Temple's archives, said to hold knowledge from Egypt's earliest dynasties, were scattered or ruined. Numerous papyri and engravings were lost to time, flame, conquest, and neglect. What persists is a portion of what once existed. In this setting, the lost Coptic manuscript isn't an isolated irregularity. It is component of a form in which documents that challenge the accepted chronology disappear, while texts that strengthen the conventional tale are safeguarded and repeated. Whether by mishap or plan, the outcome is identical. Alternative histories are erased, and the tale we are left with is the one that endured, not necessarily the one that was accurate. Coptic monks, as successors of Egyptian Christian traditions, often safeguarded knowledge that dated back to pre-Christian Egypt. They translated older texts, copied manuscripts, and maintained libraries that connected the pharaonic past and the medieval present. If the manuscript existed, it likely wasn't a Coptic original, but a rendition or summary of something older, perhaps a text from the Ptolemaic period, or even earlier, safeguarding oral traditions or written documents that extended into Egypt's prehistoric past. The monks who reportedly contained the manuscript asserted it was part of a collection inherited from a prior monastery, one that had endured for centuries and gathered texts from diverse sources. When European gatherers arrived seeking manuscripts to buy or examine, they were shown documents that included not only Christian writings, but older material myths, legends, historical narratives that didn't fit neatly into biblical or classical structures. And then the manuscript was absent, lost to flame, they said, or sold and concealed or taken by parties who preferred it unseen. What did it truly declare? We may never know. What persists are echoes. The phrases before words and before the river knew its place, repeated in letters, diaries, and indirect accounts by scholars who heard of the text but never viewed it themselves. These fragments are enticing, suggestive, but ultimately unverifiable. We cannot confirm the manuscript existed, we cannot confirm it was authentic, and we cannot reclaim what was penned on pages that no longer exist. But the tale endures, and it poses a question that resonates with everything we have uncovered thus far. If there were documents proving the pyramids were far older than we've been instructed, what would occur to them? Would they be safeguarded, examined, and integrated into our comprehension of history? Or would they be rejected, suppressed, or ruined deliberately or conveniently because they threaten a tale that has been repeated for so long it has become inseparable from fact? The Great Pyramid endures mute, holding no engravings. The Sphinx is scarred by rains from an age before Egypt. Barred doors persist unprobed, and a manuscript that might have clarified it all was reduced to ashes. Memory, it seems, is delicate. Rock endures where parchment incinerates. And perhaps that is why the constructors chose to embed their message, not in words, but in geometry, in alignments, in dimensions that cannot be easily erased. Because they knew that words could be lost, scrolls could burn, but rock, if cut accurately enough, if positioned intentionally enough, might endure even when memory itself is ruined. The lost manuscript is absent. But the pyramids persist, and they still murmur what the text might have declared. We are older than you know, older than history, older than words. The flame that devoured the manuscript may have silenced one voice, but the rocks continue to communicate. If the pyramids are vestiges of a forgotten age, if the Sphinx bears the marks of a vanished weather, if barred rooms and lost manuscripts hint at wisdom deliberately concealed, then one question becomes inescapable. Was this occurrence unique to Egypt? Or does the form extend beyond the Nile, beyond North Africa, across the ancient world itself? The response, when you start to examine, is as disturbing as it is undeniable. Giza isn't solitary. Across continents, scattered through terrains separated by oceans and millennia, endure structures that defy the accepted chronology of human society. Edifices so old they antedate script, so massive they challenge contemporary engineering, so exact they imply knowledge that shouldn't have existed when foragers still wandered the earth. These aren't graves. They aren't isolated feats of individual cultures ascending independently. They form, a global mark of advanced direction, appearing thousands of years before history asserts it should. Built by peoples whose names we don't know, whose aims remain concealed, and whose very presence has been erased from the tale we tell ourselves about society's origins. The first and perhaps most revolutionary of these locations endures in southeastern Turkey on a barren hillside overlooking the Mesopotamian plains. It is called Göbekli Tepe, and until its unearthing began in the 1990s, no one believed such a place could exist. Göbekli Tepe is 12,000 years old. To place that in perspective, it was already venerable when the first pyramids were supposedly erected. It antedates Stonehenge by 7,000 years. It antedates pottery, metallurgy, and the wheel. It was built during the pre-pottery Neolithic, a period when human beings, per every school book, were still nomadic foragers, living in small groups with no centralized power, no surplus toil, and no ability for monumental design. And yet, there it endures. The location consists of massive stone circles, each secured by T-shaped pillars hewn from limestone, some weighing over 10 tons. The pillars are blanketed with intricate etchings, animals, abstract signs, human shapes rendered with expertise that rivals much later artistic traditions. The rocks were mined from bedrock, conveyed uphill, and raised in exact arrangements. The circles were then intentionally interred, one layer atop another, as if the location was intended to be safeguarded rather than utilized. But here is what makes Göbekli Tepe so disruptive. It was erected before agriculture. The people who etched these pillars had not yet domesticated crops or animals. They had no urban centers, no monarchs, no written tongue. And yet they coordinated labor on a scale requiring hundreds of workers sustained over generations, organizing mining, etching, and erection with an efficiency that implies not only skill, but social complexity far beyond what the chronology allows. If Göbekli Tepe can exist 12,000 years ago, then the presumption that advanced design requires settled societies, agricultural excess, and hierarchical governments collapses. Something else was occurring in the deep past, something we don't yet comprehend. Journey west across the Mediterranean to Lebanon's mountains, and you meet another impossibility. At Baalbek, in the bases of a Roman temple complex, rest 3 rocks that defy clarification. They are termed the trilithon, and they are the largest worked rocks ever used in erection anywhere on Earth. Each block weighs between 800 and 1,000 tons. They are accurately cut, joined without mortar, and positioned 20 feet above ground in the temple's base. Contemporary cranes struggle to raise 200-ton loads. The blocks at Baalbek are 5 times that mass, moved into position with tolerances gauged in millimeters, set so tightly that centuries of quakes have not shifted them. The Romans erected the temples above the trilithon, but they didn't relocate the rocks. Roman technicians left documents of their endeavors, aqueducts, roads, colosseums, but they make no assertion to the trilithon. They erected atop it, incorporating the massive base into their own labor, implying they discovered the rocks already positioned, vestiges of an earlier erection whose origins even they didn't know. And in the adjacent mine, still connected to bedrock, rests an even larger rock. It weighs an estimated 1,200 tons, partially etched, abandoned mid-extraction, as if the endeavor was interrupted and never continued. Who started cutting this rock? What technology were they employing? And why did they cease? Cross the Atlantic high into Bolivia's Andes Mountains, and you discover Pumapunku, a location that presents a different sort of impossibility. Here the enigma isn't scale, but accuracy. The rocks at Pumapunku aren't the largest ever relocated, but they are among the most accurately cut. The blocks are composed of andesite and diorite, rocks harder than granite, resistant to the copper and bronze implements attributed to the Tiwanaku culture that occupied the area. And yet the rocks are cut with machine-like precision, flat faces polished to near-flawless planes, right angles gauged to degree fractions, interlocking joints that fit like puzzle segments, needing no mortar, no filler, no modification. Some blocks hold channels and grooves etched at exact depths as if rooted by machinery. Others display drill holes with uniform widths, the kind generated by rotary implements operating at high velocities. But the Tiwanaku, per archaeology, had no such implements. They had no iron, no steel, no advanced metallurgy. How then were these rocks molded? Skeptics imply that the accuracy is exaggerated, that patient manual labor with stone implements could achieve similar outcomes. But when contemporary stonemasons try to duplicate Pumapunku's cuts using Bronze Age technology, they cannot match the precision. The angles deviate, the faces remain uneven, the tolerances fail to meet the ancient norm. Something is absent from our comprehension. Either the implements existed and were lost, or the methods were far more advanced than we presume, or the chronology is incorrect, and these rocks were cut by a culture possessing wisdom that has since disappeared. Journey again, this time to Malta's island in the Mediterranean. Below the surface rests the Hippogym, an underground temple hewn directly into the limestone bedrock over 5,000 years ago. The edifice descends through 3 levels, encompassing rooms, alcoves, and passages tunneled from solid rock, with implements that once more shouldn't have been able to such labor. But the true enigma of the Hippogym isn't its age or its erection, it is its acoustics. The oracle room, a small space deep within the complex, resonates at 110 Hz, the exact same frequency as the Great Pyramid's King's Chamber. When sound is presented at this frequency, the room enhances it, generating a resonance so potent that it vibrates through the rock and into the bodies of those positioned inside. This isn't accidental. The room was planned to resonate. The constructors grasped acoustic engineering, harmonic frequencies, and the interplay between sound and rock. They etched the space intentionally to generate this effect, molding the barriers, roof, and floor to form a resonant cavity tuned to a specific tone. Why? For ritual, for healing, for altered consciousness states, we don't know. But the similarity to the Great Pyramid is undeniable. Across thousands of miles and potentially thousands of years, 2 separate cultures erected rooms tuned to the same frequency using the same resonant architecture principle. These locations, Göbekli Tepe Baalbek, Pumapunku, the Hippogym, are not irregularities. They are data points in a form, a global form of advanced direction. Exact engineering and embedded wisdom, appearing long before the ascent of the societies we credit with inventing such abilities. The form extends further to the underwater edifices off Japan's coast, submerged since the last ice age's end, to the megalithic barriers of Sacsayhuaman in Peru, where rocks weighing hundreds of tons are joined without mortar. To Costa Rica's stone spheres etched with geometric perfection for unknown aims, to Korea's dolmens, Karnak's standing rocks, Malta's temples. Everywhere the same marks appear. Massive rocks relocated with impossible efficiency, precision cutting needing advanced implements, celestial alignments implying detailed sky knowledge, and erection dating to periods far earlier than mainstream history permits. This isn't the labor of isolated geniuses or lucky mishaps. This is the mark of a lost ability, a wisdom system that once existed across the ancient world and then disappeared, leaving only the structures themselves as confirmation that something greater once was. The ramifications are astonishing. If Göbekli Tepe was erected 12,000 years ago, if the trilithon antedates the Romans, if Puma Punku's precision cannot be duplicated with Bronze Age implements, then human history isn't the steady upward ascent we envision. It is something more intricate, more cyclical, marked by ascents and descents, wisdom gained and lost, societies that flourished and then vanished, leaving only rocks too massive to erase. The Giza pyramids are part of this form. The Sphinx with its rain erosion, the Great Pyramid with its embedded mathematics and barred rooms, the underground Osiris shaft. These aren't isolated Egyptian feats. They are fragments of a global occurrence, a prehistoric culture or network of cultures possessing abilities that challenge every presumption we hold about human society's development. And if such a culture existed, the next inquiry becomes unavoidable. Who were they? Where did they originate? And what occurred to them? The rocks persist. The constructors are absent, but perhaps interred in the smallest traces, genetic indicators, mythological echoes, fragments of inherited recollection. We can still discover them. If a global culture once held the wisdom to erect structures like Göbekli Tepe, Baalbek, and the pyramids, then where are they? Where are the urban centers, the ceramics, the implements, the interments that should mark their presence? Where are the bones? For decades, this absence was employed as the ultimate contention against any notion of a prehistoric advanced society. Show us the people, archaeologists would declare. Show us the remains, the camps, the physical proof of the culture you assert existed, and for a long time there was no response. The rocks endured as mute account. But the constructors themselves seem to have disappeared without a trace, leaving no skeletal confirmation of their presence. But in the last 20 years, a new science has surfaced, one that can detect ancient peoples' presence. Even when their bones have turned to powder, their urban centers have been engulfed by time, and their artifacts have eroded into sand. This science is archaeogenetics, the examination of ancient DNA. And it has started to disclose something remarkable. Entire populations that once existed and then vanished, leaving no archaeological document, no structures, no recollection, only the faint genetic marks embedded in the DNA of peoples who followed them. They are termed ghost populations, and their uncovering is rewriting human prehistory's tale. The term ghost population refers to an ancestral group that contributed genetically to modern or ancient populations, but for whom we have no direct skeletal or archaeological proof. They exist only as statistical irregularities in genetic data patterns of inheritance that cannot be clarified by known historical populations, shadows in the DNA that indicate ancestors we have never discovered. The first major ghost population was identified in 2016 when geneticists analyzing ancient and modern DNA from the Near East noticed something odd. The genetic composition of early farmers in the region held ancestry that didn't match any known population. It wasn't from African groups, not from European foragers, not from East Asian lineages. It was something else, something older, something that diverged from other human groups before any of the populations we currently know. They named this lineage basal Eurasians. These were people who separated from humanity's main branch that left Africa, splitting so early that they carried none of the Neanderthal DNA present in nearly all other non-African populations. They existed, thrived, and contributed to later Near Eastern peoples' ancestry. But we have never discovered their bones. We have never unearthed their camps. We don't know what they named themselves, where they dwelled, or what they erected. But their genes endure, woven into the populations that followed them, silent confirmation that they were here. And basal Eurasians aren't solitary. Similar ghost populations have been detected worldwide. In Africa, genetic studies disclose the presence of at least 4 distinct extinct human lineages that contributed to modern populations, but left no fossils. In Southeast Asia, DNA analysis has uncovered unknown archaic human groups that interbred with modern Homo sapiens and then vanished. In Europe, ancient genomes display contributions from peoples who appear briefly in the genetic document and then disappear, replaced by migrations we can track, but whose ultimate origins stay obscure. Nowhere is this occurrence more pronounced than in North Africa. Studies of ancient DNA from the region disclose a complex mosaic of ancestries, including contributions from populations that no longer exist. Before the Sahara became a desert, before Egypt's rise, North Africa was inhabited by peoples whose genetic marks don't match any modern or ancient group we have identified. They dwelled during the African humid period when the Sahara was verdant, when lakes dotted the terrain, and when rivers flowed, where now there is only sand. And then around 5,000 to 7,000 years ago, as the climate altered and the desert expanded, these populations vanished. Some migrated south, merging with sub-Saharan groups. Others moved north and east, contributing to Mediterranean and Near Eastern peoples' ancestry. But the core populations, the groups that dwelled in the Sahara itself during its verdant period, disappeared from the genetic document, leaving only faint traces in their descendants' DNA. Who were they? What did they accomplish? Did they erect anything that has since been interred below the sands? We don't know, but the chronology is striking. North Africa's ghost populations existed during precisely the period when, per geological proof, the Sphinx was etched and exposed to rainfall. They were present when the climate permitted large-scale erection, when the Sahara was habitable, when a thriving culture could have developed in the region that would later become desert. And then they were absent, erased by climate alteration, scattered by their homeland's desertification, absorbed into other populations, or lost entirely. If such people erected structures during the Green Sahara, those edifices would now rest below sand, their makers overlooked, their feats attributed to later societies that encountered the ruins and asserted them. This isn't conjecture. This is human history's established form. Climate molds, societies. Droughts propel migrations. Sea level rise submerges coastlines. And when the environment shifts drastically, entire cultures can vanish, their urban centers abandoned, their wisdom lost, their very presence overlooked within a few generations. Ponder the Younger Dryas, a period of rapid and catastrophic climate alteration that occurred around 12,900 to 11,700 years ago. In less than a century, global temperatures dropped, glaciers progressed, ecosystems fell. Proof implies that this period was marked by widespread turmoil, megafauna extinctions, human population declines, and the sudden abandonment of camps across the northern hemisphere. Some researchers suggest that the Younger Dryas was triggered by a cosmic collision, comet fragments striking Earth, igniting wildfires, hurling debris into the atmosphere, and prompting rapid cooling. The hypothesis stays controversial, but the climatic impacts are undeniable. Whatever caused it, the Younger Dryas was a bottleneck occurrence, a moment when human survival balanced precariously and entire cultures may have been eradicated. If an advanced culture existed before the Younger Dryas, a culture that had developed monumental design, astronomical wisdom, and sophisticated engineering, what would have occurred to them? Their coastal camps would have been submerged by rising seas at the Ice Age's end. Their inland urban centers would have been interred by climate-driven environmental alterations. Their populations would have scattered, seeking haven in regions less impacted by the disaster. And within a few centuries, their feats would be overlooked, remembered only in myths of a lost golden age, a time before the deluge, a society that vanished. This is the ramification of the ghost populations. They aren't just statistical artifacts in genetic data. They are proof of real peoples, real cultures, real histories that have been erased by time and climate. And if those peoples possessed wisdom, if they erected structures planned to endure disaster, then those structures might still exist, attributed to later cultures misunderstood, their true origins lost. The genetic proof aligns disturbingly well with the archaeological irregularities. North Africa's ghost populations existed during the African humid period when the Sahara was verdant and the Sphinx shows proof of water erosion. Basal Eurasians contributed to Near Eastern populations that later erected sites like Göbekli Tepe and established the earliest agricultural societies. Ancient migrations track across the very regions where unexplained megalithic edifices appear from North Africa through the Levant, Anatolia, and into Europe. The form implies not isolated feats, but a network of related cultures linked by shared wisdom, perhaps fleeing environmental collapse, carrying with them the remnants of a more advanced prehistoric society. As the climate altered, as the Sahara parched, and the younger Dryas devastated the northern hemisphere, these peoples relocated, adapted, and in many instances vanished, leaving behind only their genes and, in a few places, their rocks. Modern populations in North Africa, the Near East, and parts of Europe carry genetic indicators from these ghost ancestors. The DNA endures even though the cultures themselves are absent. Even though we have no names for them, no documents of their languages, no assurance about what they erected or believed, but the structures persist. And now, with genetic proof confirming that unknown populations once thrived in the exact regions and time periods where the irregularities appear, the possibility becomes harder to reject. The constructors may not have left behind intact urban centers or extensive graveyards, but they left something more permanent. Their genetic heritage embedded in the descendants who survived them, and their engineering heritage etched in rock, too massive to relocate, too exact to erode, too mathematically advanced to overlook. The Sahara holds mysteries below its sands. Satellite imaging and ground-penetrating radar have disclosed ancient river systems, lake beds, and the outlines of camps interred under dunes. These aren't Egyptian. They antedate Egypt by millennia. They belong to the ghost populations, the peoples who dwelled when the desert was verdant, who erected during an age we have overlooked, and who vanished when the climate turned against them. If they etched the Sphinx, if they raised the megaliths at Nabta Playa, if they embedded astronomical wisdom into edifices that later cultures attributed to themselves, then we are only now beginning to reclaim their tale, not from texts or artifacts, but from the genetic echoes they left behind. The ghosts are real, they existed, they thrived. And when catastrophe arrived, whether climate shift, cosmic collision, or something else, they disappeared, leaving behind only rocks and shadows in our DNA. We are their descendants, and the structures we thought we comprehended, maybe their messages, waiting for us to finally recognize them, not as graves or temples, but as account from a society that knew it was ending and opted to safeguard what it could in the only tongue that transcends disaster: mathematics, astronomy, and rock. The wasteland remembers, the genes remember. And now finally we are learning to interpret what they have been telling us all along. We have traced the proof through rock and erosion, through venerable texts and barred rooms, through genetics and global megaliths. We have seen geological confirmation that the Sphinx antedates Egypt, engravings admitting the Egyptians discovered structures already venerable, mathematical embedding that defies the chronology, barred doors leading nowhere, lost manuscripts ruined before they could communicate, global edifices erected before society supposedly started, and ghost populations vanishing from history, leaving only their DNA and their rocks. The inquiry that began this voyage, what if the Egyptians didn't erect the pyramids, has led us to a deeper realization. The pyramids weren't erected for the people who asserted them. They weren't erected for rulers or deities or the exaltation of any single culture. They were erected for something far more profound. They were erected as memory. Not memory in the sense of structures commemorating past occurrences, but memory in the most essential meaning of the word, the safeguarding of wisdom across catastrophe's abyss. The embedding of information in a medium planned to outlast empires, languages, and even the societies that might attempt to comprehend it. The pyramids are time capsules, and the message they carry isn't written in hieroglyphs or interred in scrolls. It is embedded in their geometry, their alignments, their dimensions, encoded in the universal tongue of mathematics, astronomy, and physics. A tongue that doesn't depend on culture, era, or even the survival of those who formed it. Ponder what the constructors chose to safeguard. They didn't etch myths or legends into the barriers. They didn't leave engravings announcing their rulers or recounting their victories. They embedded Earth itself. The pyramid's dimensions mirror the planet's geometry, its radius, its circumference, the mathematical constants that govern spheres and circles. The edifice aligns to true north with accuracy that requires comprehending Earth's rotation. The conduits point to stars whose positions alter over millennia due to precession. The planet's axes slow wobble. This isn't adornment. This is data. The pyramid is a three-dimensional archive of geodetic, astronomical, and mathematical information safeguarded in rock. Because rock endures where everything else, wood, papyrus, recollection, decays, and vanishes. Why would a culture opt to embed such wisdom? Why erect an edifice planned not for function or beauty, but for permanence and communication across time? There is only one response. They knew what was approaching. They knew that disaster was inevitable, that climate could alter, societies could descend, wisdom could be lost. They had perhaps witnessed it occur before, seen the collapse of earlier cultures, the forgetting of technologies, the reduction of advanced groups to scattered survivors struggling to rebuild from fragments. And they comprehended that writing, no matter how carefully safeguarded, is delicate. Scrolls incinerate, libraries fall, languages develop and become unreadable. Within a few centuries, texts become incomprehensible. Within a few millennia, even the script itself is overlooked. But mathematics is universal. The ratio of a circle's circumference to its diameter is the same today as it was 10,000 years ago, the same on every continent, in every tongue, for every culture that develops the concept. The alignment to true north doesn't alter. The embedding of Earth's dimensions persists, readable to any society advanced enough to gauge and calculate. The pyramid is a message that doesn't rely on the survival of those who dispatched it. It communicates in proportions, in angles, in alignments, truths that transcend culture and tongue. And the message is clear. We were here. We knew things you may have overlooked. And we erected this to remind you. This is why the pyramid holds no engravings, no texts, no ritual items. It was never intended to serve the dead. It was intended to serve the future. It was erected not for Egypt's rulers, but for whoever would come after the disaster, whoever would eventually develop the implements and wisdom to gauge, analyze, and comprehend what had been embedded in rock. Perhaps we are those people. Perhaps after millennia of misunderstanding, after centuries of presuming the pyramid was a grave because we couldn't envision any other aim, we are finally attaining the level of scientific and technological sophistication needed to interpret the message the constructors left behind. The barred doors, the concealed rooms, the voids below the plateau, these aren't defenses against grave thieves. They are puzzles planned to be opened only by those able to comprehend what rests within the mathematics embedded in the edifice is a key. A test of whether the discoverer holds the wisdom necessary to interpret what comes next. And if this is accurate, if the pyramid is memory safeguarded across the millennia, then the form extends beyond Giza. Göbekli Tepe, with its intentional interment, becomes not a sacred location, but an archive barred and protected for a future generation to uncover. Baalbek's impossible rocks become bases erected to endure quakes and erosion for tens of thousands of years. Pumapunku's accuracy becomes a demonstration of ability, confirmation that the constructors possessed technology and wisdom worth recalling. The global megaliths aren't isolated feats. They are nodes in a network, a prehistoric effort to safeguard wisdom in multiple spots distributed worldwide so that even if one culture forgets, another might recall. Even if one continent is devastated, another might endure. Even if languages perish and writing is lost, the rocks will persist, carrying their message forward through time. This is the cycle. Societies ascend, attain greatness, and then descend, brought down by climate, disaster, conflict, or collapse. The wisdom they accumulated is lost. Their urban centers crumble, their names are overlooked, and the survivors, reduced to scattered groups, must commence again from nothing, rebuilding gradually over millennia until they once more reach advancement's brink. But if the prior society was wise, if they comprehended the cycle, they wouldn't let everything vanish. They would embed what they knew in the most permanent medium available, rock. They would erect structures planned not to exalt themselves, but to communicate with those who would follow, carrying forward the essential wisdom needed to rebuild, to recall, to avoid repeating the same collapse. The pyramids are that heritage, and we positioned now at our own brink facing climate alteration, ecological collapse, the delicacy of our interconnected systems should recognize them for what they are, not vestiges of a primitive past, but warnings and wisdom from an advanced culture that comprehended impermanence, that knew greatness is temporary, and that opted to leave behind something that would endure. Darkness returns to Giza, the stars surface, the same stars the conduits once directed toward, the same heavens the constructors mapped with such accuracy. The Sphinx rests in gloom, its rain-etched body a testament to ages we have overlooked. The pyramid ascends against the obscurity, massive and mute, its rocks holding mysteries we are only starting to uncover, and in that quiet, if we heed carefully, we can perceive what the constructors are telling us across millennia's span. We were like you, we erected, we knew, we thrived, and then we descended. But we didn't let everything perish. We etched memory into rock so that when you ascended again, when you became able to comprehend, you would know you aren't the first. Society has come before, and it will come again. Recall what we erected, learn from what we embedded, and when your time arrives, when your own society faces its inevitable dusk, do as we did. Safeguard what matters most, not in words that dim, but in rock that endures. Perhaps the pyramids weren't erected for the past. Perhaps they were erected for the future, for the descendants of those who endured, for the cultures that would one day ascend from the ashes of what preceded. For us, the wasteland holds its breath. The pyramid lingers, and somewhere in its barred rooms, in its unprobed voids, in the mathematics embedded in its very dimensions, the message continues, patient, permanent, and eternal. We aren't the first to position here in wonder, and we won't be the last. The cycle persists, memory endures, and the rocks, as they have for thousands of years, keep watch over a history deeper and stranger than we have ever been instructed. Sleep now. Below the stars the ancients knew. Dream of verdant Saharas and overlooked ages, and know that somewhere in the rocks the truth lingers, etched in geometry, aligned with the heavens, safeguarded for the moment when we are finally ready to comprehend. The pyramids recall, they have always recalled, and now perhaps we can start to recall